So I like this hamburger, and this is just a regular photo found on Pexels.com, but I think we can add a little bit more dynamic pop to the colors by adding some adjustments. So we have our adjustments layer right here, and you can also get to your adjustments panel over here. And since we have a smart layer on this hamburger, whenever we add a new adjustment, it will give us a smart adjustment that we can go back and delete later if we decide we don't want it. So let's start with brightness and contrast and kind of work our way through this. So let's click on our icon and adjust it. So we don't want it to look washed out, so we need to be careful with brightness, but maybe a little contrast won't hurt. Kind of bringing out your highlights and also bringing out your shadows is what contrast does. We can change our curves. We can have more of our lighter pixels, or darker pixels be lighter, which I don't like, or we can make them deeper. It looks like I might already be at some pretty good levels, but I'm just kind of going through each one of these. So I'm just adding, so that as we studied before, this is our brighter pixels. We're making them even more brighter, but we're keeping our darker pixels the same. So just added basically another way to brighten the photo. Hue and saturation, we can always add a little saturation. We don't want it to look crazy oversaturated, so that'd be a little oversaturated. So just a tiny bit. Don't want to change the hue unless, because it's going to start looking look unappetizing if you add greens to any food product. You always want to have warm tones to any food photo. So I'm just going to kind of make sure that it has some warm tones, and that's pretty much it. Let's see what else we have. But you can go back into our history. This is what we had before, so let's go back. This is what we had before, and this is what we have afterwards. So you can see we really kind of brought out a lot of those colors there and made it definitely a higher contrast photo. And we can even get really detailed and do a dodge and burn here on the burger to bring out specific shadows and highlights, but I think it was already a well-edited photo to begin with. So now our background, because right now it's just a solid purple. Let's add some really cool lighting on the background of our photo. So we can do this in a couple of ways. We can add a new layer on the very top. So let's bring this layer all the way up. And let's title this lighting, background lighting. And we are going to just do a soft light blending mode. And we're just going to paint on some lighting effects by using the brush tool and our soft light blending mode. So let's get our brush tool. Let's make it pretty big, a nice soft round brush. It's going to be nice and blended. We want to make this really big. Maybe even 2500 pixels. Let's see if that's too big. So 2500. Okay, so let's do a kind of some light coming in on the top. So click once. And of course we need to set our nice color. So let's do kind of a bright purple. Click on the top. Maybe do kind of some lighting on the bottom. You can see how that instantly added a nice pop of color. We could change our shade, add a little lighter color to it, warm tones. You can see how it's kind of adding that dynamic pop. So you can continue to add different layers here. So you can add another one and do an overlay or a soft light and do kind of a different color palette. So maybe this kind of almost pinkish hue. Maybe click twice on top. Just adding a little bit of background flare to this. And I also want to go back, I'm kind of noticing now that I'm doing that our flame, let's go back to our flame, it needs to be trimmed a little bit. You see that little bit of edge here? We want to make sure that's all trimmed off. So we have our flame right here, and we have our layering mask. Let's just paint with black and just make sure all that is just not there. That could cause problems. And print production, so we're just deleting any of that we don't need. Just trimming that up, because the other one we were able to trim the whole photo up, but with the flame we wanted to keep a little bit of the flame. So now we have a little bit more dynamic lighting, and we can even bring in another photo because this is already isolated, so we can bring any photo behind the hamburger and it's going to show. You can use any old background photo you want, but I found this on Pexels.com, just typing in texture, and just thought this vertical line kind of looked really nice, or diagonal line I should say. So we're going to get this photo like we've done all the other photos and put it in the back, in the background. And let's set a blending mode. I like to do luminosity so it adapts the colors from the background. It's not going to change any of the colors. It's going to adapt to whatever's in the background, which is our purple color. And we need to reduce the opacity quite a bit on that, and just reduce the opacity. We just want a little bit of a background texture or something to kind of really tie all this together. So we could even make that a smart object and bring it out, or have a tighter shot so there's not quite as many lines in the background. It's a little bit bigger. There we go. Perfect. So hot and juicy. I feel like we're almost done. I'm just doing a last check on colors and everything and making sure everything is okay. I think with our hamburger we can even add a little drop shadow to our hamburger. So let's double click our hamburger layer. Add a little drop shadow, because you'll notice this is before and this is after. It just kind of casts a nice deep far shadow on the background. So we make sure the size is big, maybe even the distance is big, and make sure it's very high opacity. So I think that was a nice improvement. So that was before, after, just adding a little bit of depth there. We can even add a new list. It's getting really complicated, but this is an intermediate level class, so this is what we're here to do. So I created a layer under Juicy. And let me find the Juicy text. There's the Juicy. This is where having folders can be quite helpful if you have time to sit there and do folders. Some people love them, some people hate them. So I have our Juicy layer. Let's create a layer below it. And I want to paint on some shadows. So I'm going to take our soft brush tool. It's just a standard black. Maybe make it pretty big. Maybe like 166. And I'm just going to paint on a little bit of shadows here for our Juicy type. Just a little bit, nothing big. Have it dip down right where the type is. And we can reduce that quite a bit. Just adding a little more dynamic pop. I don't think I need all. I'm just getting the eraser tool. I think I have maybe too much shadow back there. And so that's before. We still had some drop shadow effects on there, but I think that adds a little more richness to it. We can even take our top arrow tool, tuck it up a little further so it doesn't cast down as much. These really small things, they make very small changes, but in the end it's a bunch of small changes that ends up making it great. Back above. One more thing I want to do, and I think we're pretty much finished, is this hot. It's this nice deep red, but I'm losing it a little bit. I'd love it if we added a gradient to this to kind of give it more than just this solid color, maybe brighten it up a little bit. So let's double click on our hot layer, and let's go, instead of a color overlay, let's do a gradient overlay. And there's some great, Photoshop 2020 came out with some really great default gradients, by the way. So that is really refreshing. So right now I'm in my oranges. Let's go to reds. So these are available in the newest version. Of course, you can bring in create your own gradient. We take this one, double click it, and let's just make it more red. There's that orange. Let's bring it down. Or yellow, I guess I should say. Let's make this slightly orange. Make it bright, vibrant. There we go. I think that looks a little bit better. Let's bring this up. Okay, so we could still do our color overlay if we like the hot, or we can toggle off our gradients. So whatever we feel like would work a little bit better. I think I might just stick with color and just brighten it somehow just a little bit, just like that. And let's do a layering mask. I am just going to kind of do a vignette. So I'm going to take our paintbrush tool with black. And instead of having everything be the same, I'm going to kind of just trim the edges, make it kind of fade away on the edges. Kind of gives it a vignette look. Great, let's save it. I think we're ready to start getting this thing ready. I had a little bit of small print that the client needed to have on there, so I thought that would be good placement for it because it's not as important to read for the viewer. It's more of a legal requirement, so I'm kind of just doing this vertical presentation or up and down presentation for that. So now we need to make sure everything is aligned and even. So let's make sure we have our smart guides on. Smart guides are on. So I'm just going to move this to make sure I have a center point right about there. There's my center point right where that line is. And this is going to be something we're going to have to eyeball. So let's lock all of our background layers, anything that we don't want to accidentally move around, everything but the text. So now we can take this big chunk and we can even put this in its own folder and be able to move it by group or folder. But we're just going to do this, kind of click it over, make sure we have kind of a halfway point. Do some small adjustments with my keyboard, just make sure we have the right. So it's already RGB mode, it's ready to save as a digital document. So we can resize this, and what's great about this is we have smart objects on all of our layers. That we have live text, we didn't have to rasterize the text. So this whole thing can be scaled up and down without having any pixelation, which is fantastic if we need to scale this up to something larger.